Welcome one and all to the finale of my FE12 Maniac Mode 0% gross playthrough, brought to you by Don951 and Mekkah.
Hello.
And what a journey it's been to get to this point. It's been a long 3.5 years with numerous ups and downs, and honestly times at which it seemed that I would never finish this playthrough. But here we are in the final chapter with just the Shadow Dragon standing between us and the credits. And, you know, I don't have the words to express what I feel right now.
Poor Don. I mean, to be fair, 3.5 years, not your usual tempo when it comes to maps. Usually that's like how long I take to do like a single turn when I'm streaming. But either way, I too am excited to be here and watch a bunch of dragons die, because there's so many dragons on this map.
But fortunately, there's only going to be one dragon that we care about, which is Medius, and in order to kill him, we have to engage in some shenanigans. Normally the game expects you to have a pretty well-trained Marth with high stats, and the effective Falchion, which is a weapon that does most damage to Medius. But because Marth is at base, we don't really have that option, since he does like 9 damage. So we have to employ an alternative, and that is going to be Katarina. Now, it's not FE12 without one major selling spree and one big forge, and here we forge the Spirit Bomb because we need all of your energy to help finish this playthrough. The Spirit Bomb is a plus 9 might, plus 15 hit, and plus 30 crit fire forge, used specifically on the fire tome that we saved from the prologue when Merrick joined with it. And it's the most reliable option that we have to kill Medius with the current resources available. Ideally, I would have liked to use a Thoron tome, which has higher might, and we would be able to use it twice. But because we don't have the resources to forge to that much, then this is the next best option.
So most of our characters are going to be dedicated to recruiting the 4 sisters that are guarding Medius. If you don't recruit these, you have to kill them, because if you kill Medius while they are alive, he will revive and eat them to stay alive or something. It's kind of gross, honestly. The 4 bishops around him are the 4 sisters that were missing, that were kidnapped by Garneth. They are Ellis, Lena, Nina, and Maria, and they were recruited by Merrick, Julian, Sirius, and Minerva respectively. That does take up a lot of unit slots on our part, because we have to warp 4 times to get them up there, and then the 4 units that recruit themselves, which leaves very little room for people that actually help killing Medius.
Yeah, and you know, on higher difficulties where you don't have the warp staff available, sometimes what people like to do is they take an extra turn to get people up there, and then they start handing a rescue staff out to those sisters, and the sisters can start rescuing the other recruiters up there, thus hastening the process. But we ended up spending all of our rescue staff, so all we have is warp. Fortunately, we have way more than enough warp to do so, but that means that we have to forego using the save point before we engage in combat with Medius, and we have to rig 2 critical hits, one with the Starlight Tome, which fortunately has pretty high base hit and 10 base crit, and that does 51 out of Medius's 92 HP, and we have to revive Katarina with the Arm Staff and employ the Spirit Bomb and crit with that one as well. The thing is that on this difficulty and higher, Medius has 29 or 30 speed, and he's guaranteed to double all stages and 1-round KO them, and Katarina doesn't even survive 1 hit. But with us resurrecting Katarina on the other side of Medius and surprising him, we finally defeated him once and for all. And I guess we can finally say that we're done.
Yes, we are done once again.
Alright, so as per tradition, at the end of the game after we finish it, we show the credits and the unit roll, and we're going to take this opportunity to answer some of the questions that you guys posted in the previous video. I've already answered a decent amount of them, but I saved some of the more common ones for this video, and also some of the ones that I thought were a little bit more interesting.
Okay, so the first questions have actually been asked by multiple people, so if you don't hear your name, that's why. And multiple people ask, which of your 0% growth runs and which chapters in those runs have been the most difficult to plan out?
I'll start with this game in particular. I would say that chapters 12, 20X, and Prologue 8 stood out above the rest, because those chapters, even in a regular playthrough, are just very difficult. The enemy quality is high, the enemy density is pretty high, you're put in situations that are tough to deal with, and especially in Prologue 8's case, you don't really have a lot of tools to deal with them. In terms of the rest of the series, or at least the games that I've played, I think the Xavier recruitment in FE5 Chapter 18 definitely stands head and shoulders above the rest. But I think it's worth pointing out that because these 0% growth runs are done in an LTC context, LTC is always hard to do no matter what game it is. even the classically easy ones like FE8 are actually very hard to LTC with or without growth, and I've jokingly stated that like FE8 Chapter 9 Erica route was one of the reasons why I gave up trying to LTC that game on 0% growth, because that was just so frustrating. Like, it's such a large map with so many enemies, and at that point, the only good unit that you have is Seth. That's kind of a problem that you encounter a lot in 0% growth when you have to deal with route maps, in that you just lack all the strong units that you might need to clear it in the minimum number of turns. And that's why games with route maps tend to be a little bit harder to LTC than games that don't have route maps. Additionally, I'd also say that games that have the rescuing mechanic tend to be a little bit more difficult to LTC, because in FE11 to FE12, for example, your units outpace Marth, and it's easier to keep them protected, whereas in the GBA Fire Emblem games, you can drop Hector or Roy on the front lines and technically clear the map one turn faster, but then they'd have to survive an absurd enemy phase without any stat growth. Next question is by J Games. He asks, how do I and Mekkah plan out our co-commentary, as in who says what, etc., and how much of it is improvised versus pre-written?
Well, it's a little bit of both, so I'll just walk through the whole process because it's kind of fun to talk about. So it starts off with Don Don just showing me the chapter, pure gameplay, obviously no commentary. I just watch and nod along, I'm like, yeah, okay, rescue used there, that makes sense. You didn't move that unit, why is that? I ask questions just to make sure I don't fuck it up during the commentary. I just kind of figure out why the clear is the way it is and why things are happening the way they are before we actually do commentary. Then we go back to the beginning and we do what we call a test take. So we just watch the video and commentate as if we're recording, but we're really not, because we know it's going to be a horrible take since we haven't planned out anything. And we just figure out how we're going to talk about the chapter by doing it. So we go through it, and afterwards we decide what needs to change for it to become like a good take. So something might be wrongly timed, so that means we need to cut something or move it to somewhere else. And that basically is us writing the script in our head and dividing the topics. Sometimes it works out better if I say something and then Donna follows up. We try to alternate, obviously, so that factors into it too. And then once we've done like those test takes and we figured out who's gonna say what, we go back to the beginning and then we do proper takes until it works out. Sometimes stopping in between to save the parts that were good. And then it just becomes kind of pre-written, even though we don't really have a script. We just keep redoing it until it works out. It's like 3 or 4 takes per chapter sometimes, but it's all worth it. So when you hear us talk, it's actually us saying it for like the 6th time probably, but it all starts out improvised, so a little bit of both. Since we're talking about the process of making these anyway, it only makes sense to answer the question asked by Trevor Woodward. He says, how do you play out the episodes that you upload? Is it a form of tasks, or are you just very good at playing the game fast?
So the answer to that question is a bit of both. All of the inputs that go into making the run are done by my hands on my keyboard in real time. So there's no tasking involved in sequencing the inputs, but I do use some of the task tools that are available on an emulator to help streamline the process and make it more efficient, and also to make the gameplay look a bit more crisp. So one thing I do with the emulator is, in order to make a task, the emulator has to be able to record a movie file, which is a basically frame-by-frame list of controller inputs that it can play back after it's done recording. And you can use save states to go back to any point in that movie file and start re-recording your inputs. And so I end up doing that a lot because I mess up my inputs a lot, and this allows me to brush up any small mistakes that I make in the process of doing inputs. But I generally only use the re-recording function for that purpose. I don't use it for like RNG manipulation or anything of that sort. And then by the end of the chapter, when I have the movie file recorded and the list of inputs saved, then in order to record the final video, I just play back the movie file in the emulator while recording the video file, and that means that any lag that's induced by trying to record a video file at the same time as playing is no longer an issue for me, because the emulator will still play back the inputs frame by frame. It's no longer contingent on me actually pressing the buttons in the correct timing. Multiple people were interested in asking me, how did I get into the LTC and 0% gross playstyles? But to answer that question, we first have to answer Jelly Unicorn's question of where and how did I meet this Mekkah person?
Yeah, so Donald and I were both active on the forum community of Serenus Forest. We both actively participated in debates about how good characters were and like tier lists and stuff like that. We both just kind of enjoy playfully arguing with people about, say, why Nephany is better than Arran and stuff like that. That's kind of how we became acquainted with each other. And then at some point later, we started commentating together because I made a 0% growth patch for myself to challenge myself. I made it for FE8. And because I was like all about making gimmicky patches like that, kind of like how I still do like kind of gimmicky playthroughs on my channel. That's how it always was when playing Fire Emblem once I've completed them normally. So I made the patch for FE8, and then at some point Don was like, you know what, I should do this but for FE6. I don't know why he thought that, but that's what he decided to do.
Yeah, I think looking back, it was mostly for, I guess, tier list glory, because back then in the community, that was like the main reason to be in the community, at least from my point of view, because there wasn't really a whole lot else to talk about with regards to Fire Emblem. And so, like, the biggest threads in Seren's Forest historically are like the Fire Emblem 10 tier list thread, right? Like, that one goes on for eons and eons, and there was a whole lot of good argument in there. But the thing back then was that if you wanted to be known in the community, be recognized, then you had to participate in the tier list and kind of make good arguments and make change. And that's kind of how I got into LTC and 0% growths, kind of both for the same reason. For LTC, it was more because in the old days, it used to be that when people were trying to figure out how to place units, they kind of just did theorycraft Fire Emblem, and it never really reflected on how people actually played the game. And so I wanted to inject a little bit of realism into how we handle these tier list debates, which is why people did kind of like these model playthroughs to kind of show how these units did, as opposed to just theory crafting about them. And then as people got better and better at the game, it became more and more efficient, and then the end game of efficiency is just LTC. It's just when the reliability kind of goes to shit a little bit. And then 0% growth is for a similar reason, because I wanted to establish that some units were good at a certain baseline, and our general paradigm way back in the old Fire Emblem community was still kind of like growths and bases were about the same, or growths were more valuable than bases, and I didn't really believe that, and I wanted to show why that was the case. And so that's how I got into 0% growths. That segues into the next question, which is by Flying Ice. Why did I pick Mekkah to be the original co-commentator?
Yeah, there was not really like a voice of Don or anything like that where you could pick a co-commentator. It kind of just happened by accident. So Don posted his original FE6 0% growth playthrough on Seren's Forest, and people who saw them kind of liked them, but they had no commentary. And at some point I just decided to co-commentate them along with a friend, with Colonel M actually, so Don wasn't even involved. We just took the video of FE6 chapter 21, and I spent an absurd amount of time wondering why Don was selling all those items with Minerva, and Colonel M caught onto it a lot earlier than I did and just kind of laughed at me for it. I was like, it was a pretty memorable video, pretty fun to record. And I think at some point Don realized, like, he saw the video that we made, we posted it on one of our channels. Don saw it and he was like, you know what, this seems like fun, we should do this. And then somehow we ended up meeting up, because we're like sort of acquainted with each other, but not really. But that's kind of how we met, and that's kind of how we started things, and we just did FE6 together. I think at one point we even like commentated the game halfway through, and then halfway through we decided, you know what, our commentary before was kind of crap, we got better, so we actually ended up redoing that whole playthrough. So there's like a lot of history behind that, but that's really how it happened.
Yeah, to start out with, I think I had planned to do Mekkah, Colonel M, and I as 3-person commentary, but it became very quickly apparent that that wouldn't work out, because it was really hard to arrange getting Colonel M on the same time. And also 3-person commentary, especially when you haven't built up chemistry between the commentators, is really hard to balance, because you'll end up being that like one person talks way more than the other two, or people will start talking over each other because they don't know when to come in. So to start out with, it was just a lot more convenient for Mekkah and I to be commentating the videos alone, and then we kind of just left Colonel M in the dust. But if Colonel M is watching this, shout outs to him.
Okay, and we are slowly running out of time for this video, so we are going to get to the last, final, and perhaps the most important question, which is a lot of people asking, what game are you going to play next, and are you going to do any of the post-DS games like Awakening and Three Houses?
I think I've hinted at in multiple situations that I want to take care of FE7 and FE10. Not entirely sure in what order. Right now, I am working on FE7, and that is a shorter game. It's less of a time commitment to do a finished run, considering how long FE10 is. So it's most likely going to be those two games in that order. And then maybe in the distant future, depending on how much time I have, and depending on if anything else strikes my fancy, I might consider doing Tiering Saga and 0% growths, but that's kind of like a very distant possibility. As far as a question about the post-DS games like Awakening and Three Houses, You know, I feel like they're pretty adequately covered by certain other users in the community, like Rengor and Chess Jump Bowl. I know that they're doing 3 houses and Fates in particular. I feel like they've already done a pretty good enough job at that, and I don't really have that much of an interest in the post-DS games, so I will say tentatively no to that question. And then a few people also asked about like any other special projects I might have in mind. I do want to make some videos that detail the planning process in this and some of my prior playthroughs, but it would require a lot more video editing, and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to have the time necessary for that, but it's going to be something that I'm going to be striving for, and we'll see if it works out. Alright guys, so that's all the time we have for now. I'd like to thank Mekkah for commentating with me over the course of this playthrough, even though circumstances now are much different than when this playthrough first started.
For sure. I mean, I was stuck inside anyway at this point, so might as well come along, right?
Right. And I'd also like to thank you, the viewers, for your interest, your attention, and your appreciation, because this all means quite a lot to such a modest channel. So this has been Don 151 and Mekkah. So long, farewell, and until we meet again.
See ya.